Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back to Depictions Media Radio. In this next segment, we're going to hear a segment from Ontario where they are celebrating the forestry industry in on the Algonquin territories in Ontario, and how this industry has helped Ontario grow, and how it has done things like simple things like providing poles for electricity and internet to be moved around to areas in Ontario, and how this particular industry has, and especially the business itself that is celebrating this, has provided jobs and security to the people who live in the area. We're going to hear from the Minister of Energy in Ontario, as well as we're going to hear from the Premier, Doug Ford, talking about how great this particular company has been and why they need to celebrate their existence since 1847 in the territories in Ontario. So then after we have a segment from Jagmeet Singh, where he's talking about the crisis that is happening for our children, especially with the respiratory virus season that we're having, and how deadly it has become for our children here in Canada, and the crisis because of the lack of health care. Well, to that, we want to let's talk for a couple seconds about the healthcare crisis, because it isn't just affecting children. It isn't just affecting influenza. When we start to look at a 32% uprise in just a few months of medical assisted deaths that are held within the people who are living with disabilities, and how the Liberal government has, even through the pandemic, if they had given the people with disabilities a raise, they actually clawed it back in another area, knowing that there was going to be increases in inflation, knowing that prices of things were going to go up, and these people are left in desperation. And by way of an effect of how they redistributed medical assisted death, that they have provided them with a single answer to get out of the pain and suffering of poverty, as well as the pain and suffering of their particular disability, which is something that Jagmeet Singh is not going to be talking about in this, but he's going to be centered and focused totally on how the conditions that are driving the people with disabilities towards death, and he's going to focus those same conditions totally on how they need to do things to increase healthcare for children and fix the healthcare system for those who are living without a disability. But the Canadian government has left a whole sector of people behind and offered them a simple answer of go and die. So while what Jagmeet Singh is going to say in his particular segment about how the healthcare system needs to be fixed, the reasonings why it needs to be fixed, he is leaving part of that answer behind on the table, and that is that the people with disabilities need a better way out for medications on the long term. They need a way out for treatment on the long term. And that is not to say that our children don't need better facilities. They do. There's just a lot of broken stuff with how healthcare is being distributed across Canada, regardless if areas are looking at a more paid version of it, or if they're talking about the government completely picking up the tab. There's something very broken in the healthcare system. So let's listen to today's segments, starting with Jagmeet Singh, and then we will listen to the celebration that they are going to have in the Algonquin territories over the forestry industry.
Thank you so much. Good day, bonjour. Today I want to talk about the healthcare crisis in our country. In Alberta, I visited and spoke with healthcare workers, and they shared stories of how in Calgary, at the Children's Hospital, because the demand is so high, there are trailers set up outside the Children's Hospital to deal with the excess demand. Children have died in Alberta, or in BC, and in Ottawa, the Red Cross has had to be called in to children's hospitals. We are faced with a serious crisis. Parents are dealing with, and children are dealing with, agonizing wait times, where having a child unable to breathe for any amount of time is heartbreaking. And that is something that parents are going through right now across the country. And we know that healthcare workers are burnt out, are pushed to the limit. These are people who care deeply about their patients, who care deeply about people, and are feeling like they're unable to do their work because they're so understaffed and under-resourced. We are at a breaking point. Things are very serious, and it's specifically for our children's hospital. Our children are at risk right now. Given how serious it is wrong that the Prime Minister of this country is not showing up to deal with this national crisis. Justin Trudeau has a responsibility to sit down with premiers and find a solution. First and foremost, that is the number one thing we're calling for. So given how serious this is, the Prime Minister needs to show up. If I was Prime Minister, that's what I would do immediately. Meet with the premiers, look for solutions. And there's a number of things we can do. We know that the solutions are going to require making sure we increase our recruitment, so more training of frontline healthcare workers, making sure that there are more spaces available, and that's something the federal government can help with. We need to make sure that if anyone in this country has international training in healthcare, they're able to work in that field. We can't afford not to have people in our country, or we can't afford for them not to be able to work. The people who are trained in their fields need to be able to work in their fields. And finally, we need to make sure there's good pay. And the federal government made some commitments. Justin Trudeau made some promises. He should follow through with those promises to make sure people get a good, decent wage when it comes to healthcare. And there's a number of additional steps we can take, but fundamentally what we're asking for is, given how serious this is, the Prime Minister needs to step up, the federal government needs to step up and deal with this crisis. We We have with us today a nurse here in Ottawa who's going to share her experiences, and I think it's really important for us to listen very carefully to Rachel Muir, who's a registered nurse, and she's going to talk about what it's been like, how serious this is for patients coming to the hospital, for herself and her colleagues, how dire the situation is here in Ottawa in healthcare. Before I get to Rachel, I'll just do it in French, and then we'll have Rachel share her story. On a une véritable crise dans notre système de santé, c'est clair. Au Québec, à Montréal, les travailleurs de santé, les médecins, les infirmiers ont dit que c'est du jamais vu. On est dans une situation le pire qu'ils ont vu dans leur vie, avec les parents et les enfants désespérés, avec les travailleurs de santé qui sont fatigués. C'est vraiment une crise, c'est vraiment sérieuse et on doit agir. Si j'étais Premier ministre, je vais agir tout de suite. J'aurais dû répondre à cette crise immédiatement. Donc, le Premier ministre a montré un manque de leadership. Il doit faire preuve de leadership, rencontrer les premiers ministres des autres provinces et trouver des solutions. Primordialement, fondamentaux, ça c'est notre demande, que le Premier ministre doit montrer du leadership et rencontrer les premiers ministres pour trouver des solutions. Au lieu de blâmer les provinces, blâmer les premiers ministres des autres provinces, ce n'est pas un exemple de leadership. Ce qu'il doit faire, c'est de trouver des solutions. Et on exige le gouvernement de faire ça. On a avec nous, on est très fiers d'avoir une infirmière, Rachel Muir. Elle va partager son histoire, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans les hôpitaux maintenant, les histoires de ses collègues et les conditions pour les parents et les enfants et les familles qui rendent à l'hôpital. Donc, thank you so much again for being here, and I want to pass the mic now to Rachel Muir. Thank you so much for being here. Your story is going to be really important for people to hear, so thank you.
Thank you. I don't think people realize just how severe our crisis is. I have friends, colleagues, members of my hospital who cry before they come to work, cry when they leave work, because the workloads are so high. They are not providing the care that they were trained to give. We are morally injured. And it cannot continue. We need more nurses desperately. When you are waiting hours in any emergency, particularly when you're waiting with a child, when CHIO here was built to see 120 children a day and is seeing 110 in an hour, when you have to bring in the Red Cross, which is a disaster service, to help facilitate providing care to our children, what is it going to take for governments to realize that this cannot continue? Mm-hmm. Our most vulnerable are dying. In 2020, it was our elderly. In 2022, it's our children. Fortunately, we haven't seen many deaths, but how long is it going to be before it's a regular occurrence? And this is unacceptable. This is Canada. At times I'm lost for words as to why people are not listening. We've been shouting about this loud and long, and now it's critical. It's beyond critical. I've said before we're at the bottom of the barrel, but we're not. We're beyond that. We're below the bottom of the barrel. We've scraped the barrel and we've broken through. So I don't know. I personally we're tired. We're working endless shifts. I have co-workers who've worked 12 out of 14 shifts. It's a regular occurrence to work 16 hours instead of 12. Vacations are not being granted. All these things speak to a lack of personnel and a lack of respect, because we're expected to continue to do this. Children are waiting longer for surgeries than adults. They're waiting longer for surgeries than is healthy for them. Children, our CHIO ICU is at 200% capacity. We are sending children who are 14 and above to adult hospitals. These are not adults, these are children. This is stopgap measures that are not doing our children and their families any favors. It is impacting their health negatively. They wait longer for mental health services. They wait longer for care in the communities. They wait longer for assistance, for rehab, for physio, all the things that we take for granted. Why is this? This is not acceptable. These are our future generations. These are our future. And we are penalizing them because they are small and have no voice. And we're penalizing your healthcare workers because we are burnt out, we are tired, and we are morally injured.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing, Rachel. It's clear we need to act. That's the bottom line here. There can no longer be any finger pointing. The federal government's got to step up and meet with the premiers and find a solution. That's it. It can't be about waiting for someone else to give in a negotiation. This is about finding solutions immediately and then looking at the long term afterwards. We need to immediately solve this healthcare crisis and we need to see some leadership. Donc c'est clair qu'on doit agir dès maintenant. C'est une crise et on a entendu une histoire tellement puissante de Rachel et on doit agir. C'est clair. Before taking questions, I just want to add one additional point. For families, I know in addition to the healthcare crisis, people are really experiencing a lot of pressure because of the cost of living. And I just want to remind folks that as of today, the rental benefit that we fought for nearly 2 million Canadians qualify now for an additional $500. So if you are receiving the Canadian housing benefit, please make sure you apply for the additional support that is now available as of today. We're going to continue fighting for more supports, but that is something that is now available. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Good morning. Hi, Mr. Singh. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for sharing your story. Mr. Singh, Tessie Sanchi from Hill Times Research. I cover health specifically. I want to ask about what this impasse how this impasse could impact your supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals. And added to that, sir, out of the 4 points in, the healthcare points from the agreement, the healthcare spending is actually really specific. There are no timelines. There's no call for legislation. It's just saying we need additional investments. Was that a lost opportunity? Should you have been more stricter in that agreement and saying, the premiers have been calling for CHT increases for 2 years now. Should you have been stricter in your agreement and said, we want a deal by such and such date?
So we made it a priority for healthcare to be in the agreement. That's something very important to us. And to start off with the first question, if we don't see action on healthcare, we absolutely preserve the right to withdraw our support. This is very serious. And we won't make that decision lightly, but this is at the level of seriousness that we could make that serious consideration. We need to see action. And I want to make it clear, just because we haven't seen it, we're not going to give up fighting. We're not going to let the Prime Minister off the hook. We have a tool that we can use to apply more pressure, and we're going to use that tool. We're going to apply pressure. We're going to demand action. There may come a time, though, it becomes clear to us that the Prime Minister and the Liberal government aren't willing to do what's necessary for people, and we will make a very difficult decision at that point. But right now, our focus is we're going to continue fighting. We're not going to back down. We made certain elements very clear because we knew that there were some clear deadlines and clear timelines for it. We knew that in healthcare in general, we wanted to keep it open and flexible because we know for healthcare, there's going to be changing circumstances. And right now, we need emergency relief for our healthcare system. This is not about one transfer to solve it. This is about a national crisis where healthcare workers are burnt out, children's hospitals are overrun, and there's not sufficient resources to deal with the crisis that we're going through. And that's going to require some immediate and urgent steps. And that is completely missing. There is no urgency. We don't see the Prime Minister acknowledging how serious this is. Premiers are completely ignoring how the crisis is hurting families. As Rachel pointed out, this is hurting our next generation. These are children. And I thought it was quite powerful how Rachel talked about children that don't have a voice to say, hey, we're struggling, like we're hurting. These are young children that don't have that voice. We have to be their voice, and we have to demand that the government act now.
And thank you for my follow-up, just very quickly. Are you essentially suggesting, I just want to be very clear on this, because what the impasse is, premiers don't want conditions to funding, the federal government, the federal Liberals want to see a plan, they want to put plans in for specific priorities. Are you essentially telling the government, just negotiate the CHT, get that done, don't worry about the conditions?
I'm saying that this seems to be a bit of a distraction. We got the prime ministers talking about, wanting to have conditions. We got the premiers talking about we want no conditions, and we got kids that are waiting for hours for care. Like none of that is relevant to a parent that has to wait 20 hours while their kid can barely breathe. None of that's relevant to a nurse that's working so hard and is unable to provide the care that they were trained to give. Like, this is completely disconnected from the realities on the ground. That's the problem here. Like, when you hear a prime minister say, of course we want to make sure the money goes somewhere important. We want to make sure the money that's committed to healthcare goes to healthcare. We understand the fears of people in Alberta. When you got Daniel Smith, who knows where the money would go? If you send money to Daniel Smith, no one knows that that's going to go to healthcare. Same thing for Doug Ford in Ontario. No one trusts that that's going to go to healthcare. I understand that. But that can't be an excuse not to act. When we saw the pandemic, we saw the federal government act immediately. When there was a crisis, we saw immediate action. That's what we need right now. This is not just about healthcare transfers. This is about an immediate crisis that requires immediate action and a prime minister to step up and show that leadership. And we haven't seen that so far. That's what this is about. And yes, we should be negotiating a better healthcare transfer. We believe that the federal government hasn't been spending enough in healthcare for decades, whether it's conservative or liberal governments. But right now, what we need to see is immediate solutions to dealing with an immediate crisis in our healthcare system as it pertains to children. That's what we need right now.
Mr. Singh, JP Tasker, CBC News. On the Canada Health Transfer, the premiers want Ottawa to pay about 35% of all healthcare costs in cash, not a combination of cash and tax points, because they transferred some tax points a few decades back. What's your position on that? Do you think that the Fed should spend 35% in healthcare costs?
We've long supported an increase in the transfer. The amount of the transfer, we're open to the Premier's ask. We're open to hearing if there's a counter proposal, if there's different ways to deliver that. But what we're talking about today is not just that we need to increase in a sustainable, long-term way the funding for healthcare, and acknowledging that the federal government has been cutting that funding for decades, and that we need to reestablish the federal government's contribution, and the Premier's demand to increase it is very legitimate. We support that demand. But what we're talking about in addition to that is the immediate crisis in children's hospitals. That is something that is in addition to the crisis of our overall healthcare system that has been starved of funding. But we need some immediate action to support the training of additional nurses and frontline healthcare workers. We need immediate action to unlock the workers that are in Canada with international training. We need to make sure we're paying workers a good and decent wage. We need some immediate action to deal with the crisis we're up against. But when it comes to the healthcare transfer, of course we need to increase it, and we think the premiers have been really asking for something appropriate to increase that funding in a sustainable way.
Could I actually ask a question of Rachel?
Yeah.
Next. So you kind of painted a sad picture, dire straits it seems like in our healthcare system. What's your message to politicians who are bickering over conditions, they're bickering over a price tag of a health transfer? What do you say to them when you have the stories you have?
They need to sit down and actually listen to us and work with us, because we haven't had that from anyone, particularly my experience here in Ontario. We're not just we're not just fear-mongering. This is happening, and we have the solutions. Some of them are short-term because we need short-term solutions to fix the crisis we're in currently. And some of them are long-term to make sure that we don't end up in this crisis again. And a lot of it is to do with retention and respect, which we haven't seen any respect in healthcare for decades, and it's been blatantly obvious in the last 2-3 years. We're recruiting like mad and not retaining, so That's a problem. And we've lost nurses who never intended to leave their career at this point. But because of the untenable work conditions, because of the workloads, because of their personal burnout and moral dilemmas, they're leaving. So not only do we have valuable internationally educated nurses out there who are not working, we have valuable, experienced, knowledgeable nurses out there who are also not working because they couldn't keep it up any longer. When they're taking jobs in Winners and Costco instead of following a career, because that way they can get time off and they don't come home crying because they couldn't do what they needed to do for the patients they saw that day.
Good morning, Jeff Levine with iPolitics.
Yes.
You used words like crisis and it's at a breaking point. Do you think we've reached a level that this is a national emergency?
Well, it certainly feels like that. It certainly feels like that when we hear the stories. I mean, I think Rachel also highlighting what we pointed out, that the Red Cross had to be called into the Children's Hospital in Ottawa, and the Red Cross is only called in a disaster. So, I mean, it's disastrous. So we need to start treating it that way. And so far, that's not been the response of the federal government, and I think that's deplorable. Like, given how bad things are and how it's impacting our kids, I think, again, going back to Rachel, in 2020, it was our seniors. And we thought that was an alarm bell. Like our aging loved ones who are also very vulnerable, who also don't have the most powerful voice, seniors in long-term care homes. They were the ones that bore the brunt of the pandemic. And we thought, okay, never again. Let's respond to this. Let's do something to protect seniors and our healthcare system. And now it's our children. And again, no action. I mean, it's very serious. It is certainly a crisis, and it is getting to the level where it is a national emergency in terms of the treatment of children and the wait times and the potential for this to get worse. We're just at the starting point. It's also something to remind folks that this is the beginning, and as Rachel said, we've already scraped the barrel and broken through the barrel, and we're just starting. It's only going to get worse. The season has just started. We know that respiratory infections increase around this time of the year, and it's only going to get worse if we don't act now.
And you're calling on the Prime Minister to meet with the premiers, but shouldn't this be handled by the health ministers?
Certainly the health minister should meet. There's no question about it. But at the level of how serious this is, the ultimate responsibility, the buck stops with the Prime Minister. And given how bad things are, this is at the level where the Prime Minister needs to step up as well. And the health minister should certainly meet and have discussions, and that should be ongoing. But with a crisis, when you've got an emergency, when you've got a crisis, when it's national in scope, the Prime Minister has to show up. And given what we're hearing, given how bad this is, and given how this is impacting children, it is at the level where the Prime Minister needs to show leadership.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Mackenzie Gray with Global. Just want to clarify your position, because last week you said it would be irresponsible for you to trigger an election because there's a healthcare crisis now. On the weekend, you said that you reserve the right to withdraw judgment, and now you've doubled down again on that. Are you putting the Liberals on notice that you're going to be pulling the rug out from under them if they don't act on healthcare?
I want to be clear on this point. I think it's a good point. I'm absolutely ramping up pressure because this is serious, and the lack of action is really troubling. And so I want to make it clear that this is serious, and we are purposely making sure that that pressure is being felt and that we take this very seriously. We also take the decision of calling an election very seriously. That's not something we'll do lightly. My focus now is to fight, is to not give up fighting. My focus now is to use the power that we have to get action. My focus now is to raise awareness, to have stories like Rachel's come forward so that we can paint the picture of how dire things are, and we can demand this government act. I've been asking questions in question period to demand the Prime Minister to act. Right now is the time to fight to see action happen. And that's our focus. Right now, that is our focus. That's our attention on getting this government to respond to the crisis. We reserve the right, though, if it becomes clear that the government's simply not willing to act on this, we are open to a very serious decision and looking at that down the road. But right now, our focus is on making sure we get this government to act, and we use every tool possible to ramp up the pressure on the needed action to save our healthcare system, to help kids right now that are struggling and to support our healthcare workers.
But I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. Tuesday last week, it was irresponsible for you to pull the rug out. Now you seem like you're changing your tact. Are you changing your position here? Yes or no, clearly on that. Is it still irresponsible to have an election right now?
Having an election is a very serious decision, and that doesn't change. Having that would be something very difficult to do. It would put the country into an election where we would not be able to get any action done. So I think that's very serious. And in the midst of a crisis, yes, of course, it's something that I take very seriously. It's not a decision I would do lightly, and it is not my focus. My focus is not on how do I find a path to triggering an election. That's not my goal. That's not my focus. That's not what I want to do. I always have the ability. Our team always has the ability to withdraw our support. That remains an option. We always have that option. It's an option we take very seriously. We don't take it lightly. And in the midst of a crisis, that would have serious repercussions. And we understand that. We reserve that right, but our focus right now is not on triggering an election. Our focus right now is to get the government to understand that we want to have the Prime Minister understand just how serious this is and that action is required. That is our focus. Our focus is on fighting. Our focus is on getting action. Our focus is on making this Prime Minister understand how serious this is and that he needs to show up. That's our focus. That's our priority. And if it comes to a point where we've exhausted all options and we've exhausted all our attempts to get some action and this government's not acting, we reserve the right to withdraw our support.
Et nous avons une question en ligne. Raymond Filion.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh. Justement, à ce sujet-là, quel geste concret vous demandez au gouvernement Trudeau, à défaut de quoi vous seriez prêt à déclencher les élections, à retirer votre appui au gouvernement? Qu'est-ce que ça prend?
À ce moment, ce qu'on demande au gouvernement de faire, c'est de rencontrer les premiers ministres pour trouver des solutions. Donc ça, c'est notre demande. On veut voir d'action pour reconnaître qu'on est dans une crise. Et une crise que Rachel a partagé des exemples, comment c'est sérieuse, comment les parents, les familles, les enfants sont désespérés, comment les travailleurs sont aussi désespérés, et comment on doit avoir le Premier ministre faire preuve de leadership, de rencontrer les Premiers ministres, d'essayer de trouver des solutions. Ça, c'est notre demande. Et si, après nos efforts, parce qu'à ce moment, on se bat pour les gens, on met l'effort, on essaie de trouver des solutions, on essaie de mettre la pression sur les épaules du gouvernement, des libéraux, des premiers ministres d'agir. Et s'il n'agit pas, et si après tous nos efforts, c'est clair que le gouvernement ne veut pas répondre à cette crise, on a toujours le pouvoir de retirer notre appui, mais à ce moment, c'est le moment de lutter, c'est le moment pour la bataille, pour forcer ce gouvernement d'agir, et ça, c'est notre priorité, pour prendre au sérieux le pouvoir qu'on a, de effectivement retirer notre appui pour faire déclencher une élection. C'est une décision qu'on ne prend pas légèrement, c'est une décision qu'on va prendre avec toutes les responsabilités que ça prend, et c'est maintenant le temps de continuer de mettre la pression pour voir d'action, parce que notre but, c'est de sauver les vies, c'est de sauver notre système de santé, c'est d'aider les travailleurs, c'est d'aider les enfants. Ça, c'est notre but. Notre but, ce n'est pas de faire déclencher une élection. Notre but, c'est d'améliorer la condition des gens.
Et vous vous donnez jusqu'à quand? À quel moment, là? C'est quoi votre échéance?
Ça, c'est au gouvernement à ce moment de montrer s'il veut agir. C'est au gouvernement de montrer s'ils vont prendre au sérieux cette crise. Donc, on va continuer de mettre la pression et on va continuer d'analyser la situation. Et pour le moment, pour moi, c'est le temps de reconnaître les histoires des travailleurs. Les infirmières qui partagent comment ils pleurent avant de travailler et quand ils quittent la journée, parce que c'est difficile. Les enfants qui ne peuvent pas respirer, le fait que la Croix-Rouge était appelée à Ottawa, donc c'est maintenant le moment de partager ces histoires, de montrer que le gouvernement doit agir et d'utiliser notre pouvoir pour forcer le gouvernement d'agir. C'est le moment de faire ça.
Just one more question, Mr. Singh. You said earlier that the provincial demands are appropriate. The core demand of the provinces is that the feds give them a bunch of new money, no strings attached. Then you subsequently said that you can't trust Daniel Smith or Doug Ford to spend that money on healthcare. So which is it?
The demand of increasing funding is something that I think is appropriate, not the no strings attached. I've always said that Canadians expect that the money should go towards healthcare. I've always said that. I maintain that. That's never changed. But the core demand of saying that the federal government needs to step up, that's something that we've long called for. We've campaigned for it numerous years, saying the federal government has not been spending adequately on healthcare, and so clearly our message has been very consistent that we need to see an increase in funding. And the Premier is demanding for an increase in funding. I've stood with John Horgan when he was Premier to say, yes, absolutely. Premier Horgan's demand for increased funding is appropriate. The federal government hasn't been spending enough to protect our healthcare system, to invest in healthcare workers, to provide the best care possible for patients, and to make sure kids aren't struggling to get access to care. So we've long said that the funding should increase. We support that. And we've always said that making sure the money goes to where it's intended to go to, that it goes towards healthcare. That has always been our position.
Just one final question, if you're okay. The federal government conversation with the provinces about the funding is not about whether or not it goes to healthcare. The agreement is that it should go to healthcare. It's about whether or not that funding is directed towards things like long-term care, mental health, or having agreements to share data. So do you support that the federal government shouldn't give any money over the provinces unless agreements on those topics are a part of that deal?
The fundamental question around making sure the money goes to healthcare is to make sure it's spent in a way that is in line with the Canada Health Act. That's what we're really concerned about. We see premiers that are spending money on privatizing our healthcare system, and that our public dollars are going towards lining the pockets of private companies. That's a big problem. That's going to cut care. We've seen examples of that in the long-term care sector where public money went to for-profit long-term care homes, where the military came in and saw they were the worst conditions that they've ever seen. These are hardened military, Canadian Armed Forces, that went into seniors' homes and said, we haven't seen worse conditions in war. That was in for-profit care. So we're deeply concerned about that. We want to make sure that there's good accounting, that when we're spending money on healthcare, that it's going towards healthcare that follows the Canada Health Act principles. And those are some important requirements to make sure it's public, that it's public administered, that it's universal. And there's some deep concerns with people like Daniel Smith and Doug Ford who don't share those values, who've opened the door to private model of care, which would increase profits for companies but wouldn't increase the care for our loved ones. So these are things that are really important. But ultimately, all that, while very important, doesn't change the fact that we're in a crisis, and at this point in time, the Prime Minister just has to step up and start looking for solutions to deal with the immediate crisis in front of us. And of course, we've got to deal with the long-term problems in our healthcare system, and those continue to be really important. But with a crisis that we're up against, that can't be the barrier for action to solve the problems that we're seeing in our children's hospitals across the country.
I'll let my final question be for Rachel, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Rachel, as you said, you're actually in the hospitals. You're where the politicians aren't really going. There are so many problems right now. A lot of them are going to take a long time to fix. You acknowledge that in your statements. What are some of the short-term, quick fixes that would help professionals like you feel better about going into work and doing your job? The things that they can do quickly.
The biggest thing is we'd like to see a lot more respect. So, because we haven't seen that. But short term, we need to look at better remuneration. We need to look at ways of bringing back those nurses that we've lost recently. Get them back to the bedside, because not only are they paramount in caring for our patient populations, because of the skill set and the knowledge base they bring with them, they're also paramount in mentoring and supporting our new nurses. Because I think what people fail to realize is that we're not just losing nurses of my generation who have just said, well, I'm close to retirement anyway, I'm out of here. We're losing nurses who are 1 or 2 years into their career. I know of nurses who have come to institutions, and in my institution as well, and they haven't even made it out of their orientation because they've seen what they're going to be faced with. They don't have support. They're going to be working literally all the hours there are, and they're not willing to sacrifice their mental and physical health for that. So we need to bring people back so that we can support people, and then we need to work on keeping them.
Thank you, Missy.
Can I just squeeze another one in?
Yeah, sure.
It's actually on another topic. Tiff Macklem is speaking to reporters later today at his year-end press conference. I know your friends in Labour have been critical of his fight against inflation, consistently raising interest rates. What do you want to hear from the Governor of the Bank of Canada later today about the fight against inflation?
A couple of things that I want to raise. You know, one of the points that I made in committee directly to the Governor of the Bank of Canada was my concern that he was quick to raise concerns about wages. He made a comment about employers not increasing wages, and for whatever reason, he weighed in on the question on wages, saying that, you know, this inflation won't last for long, or, you know, employers shouldn't increase wages, and has been completely silent on profits. When we talk about the inflationary crisis we're going through, this isn't a wage-based inflation. And there's lots of economists that have pointed out we're not in the past. We saw clearly wage-driven inflation. Wages were high and it was driving up demand. But that's not what we're going through right now. We know exactly what we're going through. We know that there's a war going on, and that war has created certain conditions. It has increased the cost of energy because of the war, and that has driven up the cost of a lot of things. And we also know that corporate greed is driving up the cost of things. So for the Governor of the Bank of Canada to weigh in on wages but say nothing about the corporate greed, to say nothing about the massive profits, is problematic. It is a clear bias. And what we have is a Liberal and Conservative, the Liberal government and Conservative Party, who are also unwilling to actually talk about one of the real problems that we're going through. The cost of living is up because the price of goods are up because corporate greed has driven up the cost of things. And no one is willing to tackle that problem, to look at solutions towards dealing with that. While in other countries around the world, that has been something that's been dealt with. We've seen the European Union put in an excess tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. We've seen the United Kingdom take similar steps, Spain take similar steps. So we wouldn't be leaders in this. We would actually be supporting some major countries in the European Union that has actually understood that there is corporate greed that is driving up the cost of living. In fact, we saw the CEO of Shell himself say that government should tax energy companies at this time, given the massive profits they're making, and use that to help people with the cost of energy. So that's one thing I want to see. I also know that in the mandate that the federal government sets, it's not just about reducing inflation. It also includes a provision around making sure we have maximum employment. And that is something that I'm worried about. If the steps that the Bank of Canada are taking are going to sharply and quickly increase the interest rates to the level that it's going to cause a recession in Canada and cause a loss of jobs, well, that's also a major problem. And fundamentally, this all comes back to the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister is allowing the only response to inflation be the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates and not taking any fiscal policy decisions to actually lessen the blow of inflation, to find ways to deal with the cost of living that don't require the singular solution of increased interest rates, then it's the Prime Minister's fault for not stepping up and doing enough to deal with inflation. And have you recall, his first response to the inflation when we asked him questions was, it's not our fault, and it's worse in other countries. That shows a lack of understanding of what people are going through. And so that would be a bit of a long-winded summary of what I would expect the Bank of Canada to weigh into and what the Prime Minister should be doing. Thanks. Yes.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure today, on behalf of the Shaw family, to welcome you all here for the 175th anniversary of their arrival in this country. We're particularly delighted that Premier Ford is able to join us today. The agenda will have a number of short remarks by various people, but I'm just going to set a little bit of context about what 175 years means. It's really just a number, And if you say a century and 3/4, it sounds longer. However, when the Shaw family arrived in Canada in 1847, they didn't arrive in Canada because there was no Canada. Confederation of this country didn't take place until 20 years after John and Barbara Shaw arrived. To give a little more context, south of the border in the United States, things were not very united. The Civil War, which destroyed the U.S. divisions, essentially didn't end until 18 years after the Shaw family arrived in this country. And back to our own area here, Renfrew County, we didn't become a county until 14 years after the Shaws first arrived here. These numbers may sound reasonably long, but for millennia before that, the Algonquin First Nation made this area their traditional home. At this point in time, I wish to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin First Nation, and behind us, about a kilometer away, is the great Ottawa River, the Kitchissippi. And on that river, our native Canadians, first here, spent millennia surviving, thriving in this area. It's my pleasure now to ask Chief Wendy Jocko of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan to come to the podium.
Thank you, Fred. Dear friends, Shaw family, Premier Ford, honored guests, Pajashin, Kakina, Tunisia, Nongam, welcome and bienvenue to everyone here today. Anishinaabe akin ate awaso kikanawadjikan. This land we're upon is the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. It's a great honor and a pleasure to welcome you to Algonquin territory, which has been blessed by the Creator with many gifts, particularly our magnificent forests filled with an abundant variety of tree and animal species. I would like to begin by thanking Herb Shaw and Sons for the invitation here today to join you on this special occasion to celebrate your 175th anniversary. 1847 seems like such a long time ago. That was 20 years before my great-grandfather was born, Paul Jocko. He was born in 1867. Herb Shaw and Sons was established 26 years before the establishment of the Golden Lake Indian Reserve, Band Number 39, now known as the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation. Algonquins were encouraged to leave their traditional hunting grounds to make room for the logging boom and migrate to the only reserve in Ontario within Algonquin territory. Some took that opportunity to move and some did not. They remained on the territory to live as they always did, hunting, fishing, and trapping. Herb Shaw and Sons has employed many people over the 175 years of operations, including many Algonquin and Indigenous peoples, including my own father. I've heard many stories from my father of working in lumber camps, and he started when he was only 12 years old, working for $1 a day. Stories of challenging work, laughter, campfire meals, and burning their long underwear in the spring, including log drives, which claimed many lives, unfortunately. During World War II, my father joined the Forestry Corps and was posted to Scotland, where he helped during the war effort. And I understand that Herb Shaw and Sons also hail from Bonnie, Scotland. It is a beautiful place, and I did live there for 10 years myself. I've seen the Scottish Highlands, which is remarkably similar to the Ottawa Valley. The logging industry has transformed quiet Algonquin villages with modern birch bark dwellings and businesses we know today. The logging industry has contributed to the population increases, cultural and economic growth of Ontario. The Ottawa Valley is a beautiful part of Algonquin territory in which to live, work, and raise a family. I look forward to hearing more stories of your 175 years of successful operations. Congratulations to this incredibly special occasion. Miigwech, thank you, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chief Jocko, and I would draw your attention to the flag of Pikwakanugan directly above the big loader, and that is in honor of Wendy's attendance with us today. My next task is to introduce Rob Berardi, who is the Vice President of Shared Services for Hydro One. And as you'll hear later in the presentations, Hydro One has been a very strong supporter of the crown jewel in the Shaw family legacy, namely the Shaw Woods Outdoor Education Center. In bringing you forward, we deliver our thanks once again for that support.
Thank you, Fred. I'm thrilled to join you here today on behalf of Hydro One to take part of this incredible milestone. It's both a privilege and an honor to be here. Ontario businesses are the backbone of our economy. They create jobs in the communities they operate in. They attract investments to the regions they serve, and they provide goods and services we all depend on. The demand for clean electricity is expected to grow significantly over the next decade. That's why we are making timely strategic investments that will benefit all our customers now and into the future. That includes continuing to purchase wooden electricity poles to renew our aging infrastructure. We know this would not be possible without the support of Ontario's forestry sector. In fact, the material used to manufacture the poles we install come from the company that's hosting us here today, Herb Shaw and Sons. Herb Shaw and Sons, a family-owned business, has a long history of providing countless jobs and opportunities to the people of Pembroke, Petawawa, and across Eastern Ontario. Congratulations on your 175th year in business, and thank you for your hard work and dedication in supporting Hydro One. Hydro One is building on the success of our partnerships to make new connections with Ontario-based suppliers at every opportunity we can. We've set a strong target for ourselves to source 5% of all materials and services from Indigenous businesses by 2026. And because of the partnerships with AOP, First Nations, and Herb Sons, we are on track on meeting that goal. Thank you and again for having me, and I'll pass it over to MPP Yakabuski. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Took 175 years to plan this event, so I'm glad you're enjoying it. Absolutely, Chief Jocko touched on it a little bit, as did MC Blackstein. 175 years, it's hard to even imagine what the Shaws faced when they actually came here from Bonnie, Scotland, as ex-Mayor Sweet would say. Bonnie, Scotland, absolutely. And how much this country has changed, and how much they've been part of it, and how many people have been impacted and affected by this family and the work that they do. And I say that the crowd that has joined us today is a testament to the feelings that the people of this valley have for the Shaw family and the work that they have done and the impact that their business has had on so many families over the years. I know Wendy spoke of her father working for Shaws. How many other people's fathers have worked for Shaws, and mothers? It's amazing when you have that kind of history. So it's something that we all have to be proud of as people from the Valley, to have a company with that kind of longevity and that the generational succession to continue to forge ahead and do the kinds of things that are so important to us here and so important to our other forestry operators as well. But I'm just pleased to have so many of you here today to bring greetings to the Shaws, commemorate this tremendous anniversary. I want to thank Premier Ford for recognizing the importance of this as well. I mean, it is not that often that you get a Premier and two ministers to come to an event, but we have them here today because they all see the importance of this, not only to the people of this valley, but to the people of Ontario, as Rob indicated. The impact of this business to a company like Hydro One that brings our electricity, delivers our electricity all across this province and uses Shaw lumber poles to get it there. I don't think it can be overstated, the tremendous contribution. And I've had the pleasure of knowing this family over the years, as did my father. And I'm proud to be here today as your local member to be able to share in this tremendous day. So thank you to the Shaws. Thank you to everyone who has worked for them over the years, everybody's contribution, and thank you to the people for being here today. God bless you all. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Yak. It's great to be here on your turf. Just another job you haven't done, Yak. Hey, listen, these people know what they're getting. I mean, what a guy. John Yakubuski is the loudest voice in our caucus for rural Ontario. That's his tone and everything else that goes with it. But he's a great champion for rural Ontario, particularly the area that we find ourselves in here today. And thanks for arranging the weather, Yak. This is a beautiful, beautiful day here in Petawawa/Pembroke. We're close. It is great to be here with Premier Ford, and I want to offer my sincere congratulations to Herb Shaw and Sons on the outstanding achievement of 175 years in business, and knock on wood, many, many more in the future. As the Minister of Energy for Ontario, I'm focused each and every day on ensuring a reliable and affordable and clean electricity system for all Ontarians. And after more than a century of use, wood utility poles are still the industry standard, allowing companies like Hydro One, as Rob said, to build a grid that can withstand the impacts of extreme weather, improving power resiliency and reliability for customers. And it's your commitment to quality here at Herb Shaw and Sons that makes it all possible. So thank you for all of your hard work to ensure that the power is always available where and when it's needed. And congratulations again on an incredible milestone, 175 years in business. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen Shaw, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about just how important this day is. Kristen, I'll turn it over to you.
When it comes to giving speeches, I'm no politician, so please bear with me as I try to hit this out of the park. Thank you, Honourable Todd Smith, for that introduction, and thank you for all the speakers who not only took the time to be here today, but to also speak on behalf of business in Ontario and to celebrate the long-standing business, our business, from here in Ontario. Thank you also to MPP John Yakubuski. You're a man of the people. Thank you. I'd like to thank those of you who made it a point to be here today in honor of the 175th year that the Shaw family has proudly been doing business in Canada, proudly been doing business in Ontario, and proudly been doing business in the Renfrew County. Specifically at Lake Dory, the place where roots run deep for this family and continues to be a special place, as it is now the location of the Shaw Woods Outdoor Education Centre, which has welcomed over 4,000 students annually over the past 12 years. It prides us to be able to share and to promote outdoor learning and to allow young people the chance to experience nature. The hope is that the impact of nature will be far-reaching. As mentioned, our roots run deep at Lake Dory. It is the place where it all started for this family and this business over 175 years ago. And today we want to honor these roots, our forefathers, my father and current working generation, and to speak about the future. The farther backward you can look, the further forward you can see. It is very important to know where you come from, to know where you're going. It was opportunity that made John Remshaw I decide to leave Inverness, Scotland, and drop roots in the upper Ottawa Valley in 1847. Moving to Lake Dory and establishing a water-powered sawmill and grist mill, John Shaw I set in motion what would become a family's legacy. This set the stage for 6 generations to continue what he started. The great abundance of natural resources in this area has allowed us to harvest timber and continually grow as a company, all because of the decision he made to move his family to what was then a rugged Ottawa Valley. The abundance of natural resources and the controlled manner in which harvesting has taken place over our 6 generations has allowed us to work some of the same areas a multitude of times, with generations of harvesting in these areas still to come. I want to mention that our industry, the forestry industry, is sometimes a fairly volatile one exemplified greatly of late. Over the last 175 years, despite these rises and falls in the industry, Herb Shaw & Sons maintains focus on certain things above others, which have been to do honest work, to do our part to contribute to our community, to provide employment for people in the community, and to help support families by doing business within the community. An article published in the Pembroke Observer in 1968 focuses on the purchase of Pine Ridge Lumber Company by Herb Shaw & Sons, a fairly significant event in the history of this company. The premise of the article isn't what made me copy it and hang it on my desk. What caused me to do so was that it shows the heart of the company. The article is full of Donaldisms. Donald was my grandfather and part of the 4th generation of Herb Shaw & Sons. He was a character, but most importantly, he had the skill for seeing things for what they really were. These examples are clearly depicted in this article. When asked about the state of the industry, his answer was fairly simple. He said, in so many words, common sense will prevail. Do honest work and treat your people well. My favorite part of the article was when Donald was asked about the legislation and how lumbering in our area could be so negatively affected that moving out of the Ottawa Valley may be the best option for continued success. Donald's answer was again very simple and to the point. His reply wasn't the economic-based answer some would expect from a businessman, but rather he said, "We look after our men, many of whom have been with us all their working years. We are concerned for them. Sure, we could move our industry out of the area, but you can't take 79 employees and their families with us." It is with these few quotes that I shed light on what means the most to us, being a private business in the Ottawa Valley. We do honest work, we treat people well, and we hope that common sense prevails. So what does it take to not just run a business, but a family-owned and operated business and be successful for 175 years? Success isn't an outcome of being smarter. It is opportunity and the ability to seize it that turns these outcomes into success. We have the opportunity to conduct business in Ontario, where government works with private industry, where the government recognizes the importance of creating opportunity for private industry to succeed. When private industry succeeds, people in Ontario succeed. Success is made on the backs of people who know how to work and who aren't afraid to do it. We, as a private business, have a continued aim for growth, as growth within the company is far-reaching. It means growth for our employees, for families, for our community, and for Ontario as a whole. With this said, it is now time that I introduce our Premier, Doug Ford, a businessman in his own right, a man who knows the importance of promoting business in Ontario and keeping business in Ontario. Premier, thank you for joining us today to celebrate 175 years of successful business here in Ontario.
Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. And Kristen, you were reading those quotes out, and it reminded me of my dad talking as well as your grandfather told you and your father. And before I start, I just want to, again, congratulate the Shaw family. 175 years, 6 generations. A lot of companies can't even make it through the second generation, not mentioning the 6 generations. But it's an absolute pleasure to be back here in Petawawa in the beautiful Ottawa Valley, I should say. It's great to be here alongside Minister Todd Smith, Minister Graydon Smith, no relation, even though they look like brothers. And we got the whole Smith clan down at Queen's Park. I think we have 5 of them or 4 of them. And PA Rick Breeze and the one and only MPP John Yakubuski. I'll tell you, I got to tell you a little side story. He has been on to me every single day for last year about coming here, and when John speaks up, I'll tell you, everyone listens. He's a great guy. He's probably one of the most loved people down at Queen's Park, almost as loved as he is in this community. And, you know, you talk about 175 years. I was thinking that's when you first got elected, Yak, and we affectionately call him Yak. And I know Yak's family has a huge history here. I don't need to tell you that there is no bigger champion for Renfrew County than John is down at Queen's Park. I also want to thank Rob Berardi. Thank you, Rob, for coming out here, doing a great job at Hydro 1. Fred Blackstein. Fred, thank you for being our host, too. And Chief Wendy Jocko, thank you, Chief, and thank you for everything that you do. Jocko, I should say. Kristen Shaw, we just heard from Kristen, and Mayor of Petawawa, Gary Service, Mayor of Pembroke, Ron Jervis, I should say, Warden of Renfrew County, Peter Eamon, and the entire team here at Herb Shaw & Sons Lumber for hosting us here today. As you heard, Shaw is a huge provider of many of the hydro poles used around the province, and they're absolutely world class. They've been a staple in Petawawa, providing good jobs and building this community, again, for 175 years. That's an exceptional achievement, and we're so proud of their continued success and their role in building Ontario. Shaw is a major part of our government's historic effort to build up high-speed internet access right across this province, which is on track to bring reliable broadband internet service to every community in Ontario by 2025. As we work towards building all of Ontario for the future, we're investing $4 billion towards achieving that goal. The largest investment in connectivity infrastructure in Canadian history. And the results of this commitment are already being seen in communities throughout Ontario. Just this past August, we signed agreements through the Accelerated High-Speed Internet Program with 8 internet service providers, companies, to bring improved access to up to 339 municipalities across Ontario. These municipalities were previously unserved or underserved in terms of online connectivity. And that means they didn't have access to the same opportunities that everyone in Ontario deserves. That's not acceptable, and we're fixing it with no delay. This is important for people and families in rural Ontario, but it's also massive for the many businesses that operate outside the big cities, because as so much of the global economy is moving online, we're leveling the playing field for all Ontario businesses to compete on the world stage. Whether you are based in Trenton or Timmins, Peterborough or Petawawa, it's all part of our government's plans to build Ontario from north to south, east to west, with nobody left behind. But my friends, we know there's more to do. We must stay focused, and we can't take anything for granted. As we navigate global economic uncertainty, our government has been hard at work, building an economy that can weather any storm, an economy that never loses sight of what's most important, helping people succeed, helping workers succeed. That starts with creating an economic conditions that attract investments and growth and good jobs. We've cut red tape to reduce the cost of doing business in Ontario by $7 billion annually. We've kept taxes for people and businesses low. We're investing in the skilled trades and a workforce that's prepared for the jobs of today and tomorrow. We're building roads and highways, and we're making investments to improve the province's competitive advantage and ensure that Ontario remains the greatest place anywhere to live, work, and raise a family. And while the world faces economic uncertainty and our challenges with inflation are not over, one thing I have complete confidence in are the people of Ontario. There are no harder working people on earth. And I know that together we will accomplish incredible things. Together we will build Ontario. Thank you, and God bless the people of Ontario. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Premier Dylan
Hi.
Dyson, CTV Ottawa. Given the rise in flu and with hospitals so overwhelmed right now, do you have advice to Ontarians on how to manage this season right now?
Yeah, go out and get your flu shot. That's the most important. I had a great conversation with Alex Munter over at CHEO. We're almost doubling the ICU capacity, pediatric ICU capacity. And again, I gave him a shout out every press conference. I'm going to give him. We're so blessed and fortunate. We have a leader like Alex, thinking outside the box, coming up with great ideas. So go out there. If you haven't got a flu shot, go get one.
And to follow up, given the near impossible task of finding cold and flu medication in pharmacies, does the province have a plan to reassure families, parents that they can get medication when they need it?
Well, the medication, that falls under the federal government. I know they're trying to do everything they can to bring medication in from the U.S. The problem was the labeling. Sounds crazy. I'm a label guy. I would have been having labels on there. But, you know, if we can get it in any language, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is getting the medication up here. So the federal government has to continue working with the pharmaceutical companies on that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Premier Ford, Katie Nicholson with
Hi,
CBC
Katie.
National News. We are in Renfrew County. This
Yes.
was where that triple femicide happened in 2015. We're coming up on the 6-month mark of the inquest that made 86 recommendations, many of them to the province. I wonder if this is a good time for you to maybe speak to the province's commitment to meeting some of those recommendations on intimate partner violence.
Well, you know, something that's unacceptable, any intimate violence within partners, and we're always there to help the community. And I know, John, you've been close to that, and if you want to come up and say a few words, you're welcome to, or by all means.
Yeah, thanks for that, Premier, and I've had a number of discussions with many people on that subject, including, of course, people here in Renfrew County, but also, with Solicitor General Kersner as well. And he is very, very aware and is taking a close look at all of those recommendations, and I expect that in the not-too-distant future we'll be able to speak on the totality of them. And you know that in the past I have tried to pursue private members' bills on some of those issues, and we were all shocked. I remember being at the international plowing match on the day that happened, and then Solicitor General, or I guess he was Public Safety Commissioner or Attorney General, maybe Yasser Naqvi, and we talked about it that day about what we were going to be facing, and it is a terrible thing. But I want to make sure that people understand that Minister Kersner and our entire government is taking a close look at those recommendations and wants to speak when they've had a chance to go through them all, so that when they've completed that task, there will be answers and actions for coming forward. Thank you.
Just one follow-up on cell connectivity, which was one of the recommendations to improve cellular connectivity in rural areas, particularly this one. I wonder what progress is being made working with industry, working with the federal government.
Well, we have made tremendous progress, and we have a reverse auction going on, and Kinga Surma, our Minister of Infrastructure, is literally seized on the issue of bringing connectivity to all across, to everyone in Ontario, as the Premier said in his address, by 2025, and that's not that far away. But we have great partnerships with internet service providers, and each and every day, more and more progress is being made. Actual physical implementation in one area obviously, every area at the same time. But I am confident it is something that we're committed to. Our Premier committed to that. In fact, here in Renfrew County, at the kickoff of our 2018 campaign, he kicked off our campaign with that commitment to connectivity, and we're confident that we'll be able to see through that. We know how important it is here in rural Ontario. Everywhere I go, I mean, I see it myself every day, and I know that my guests that have driven through Renfrew County probably wonder why they dropped a call at one place or another. But this is a commitment, and this is one of our first projects, is to improve the cellular connectivity, but then we're going, by 2025, we should be able to provide that internet connectivity to all homes as well here in Ontario. So thank you for that question.
Debbie Christing, the Eganville Leader.
Hi,
Premier
Debbie.
Ford, thanks for coming to the
Thank
Ottawa
you.
Valley. And we're very proud of a lot of things in the Ottawa Valley, including Hershaw and Sons and their wonderful history of innovation and growth. And we've also been able to have the Renfrew County VTAC here, which was also a pioneer in establishing virtual triage assessment during the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what kind of ongoing commitment promise the province can give us to ensure that we have that access to primary health care, which is a real need throughout Ontario, but especially in rural parts of Ontario like the Ottawa Valley.
Yeah, thanks so much for your question there. It's absolutely critical that we never lose track of rural Ontario, making sure that they have the proper funding to have care right across the board. We've increased healthcare spending $5.6 billion this budget, $5 billion before. We've added over 14,000 nurses just this year alone. We're building medical universities in Ontario for the first time in decades. We're going to continue making sure that the needs and the requirements to keep all rural Ontario healthy.
So as a follow-up, just looking for sustainable funding for these primary health care programs that are so important for Renfrew County, like Renfrew County VTech. And we also have our community paramedicine program, which has been really world-class and made us so proud.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Chief Nolan here.
Yeah.
And just actually pushing as well for ongoing funding for that.
I've been a big fan of Chief Nolan with the paramedicine program. This Chief Nolan, even throughout the pandemic, was thinking outside the box. You know what I love our paramedics? They don't need to be told. They don't need to be directed. They just go and get the job done, and we saw that with the chief throughout the whole pandemic, so thank you so much. And you're right, it's world-class. We're always going to make sure that we're funding that, but have sustainable funding, not this one-time funding. And this is the conversation the Premier's had on Friday. We don't need one-time money from the federal government. They're giving us 22%. The provinces are paying 78%. That's not sustainable. We need to make sure we sit down with the federal government and put together a sustainable deal that we see continuous funding moving forward for decades to come. And we've been asking the federal government for a meeting. Hopefully early in January we'll be able to sit down. We're asking for a 35% increase and an incremental increase of 6% every year and $28 billion. We're paying our fair share. We need the federal government to pay their fair share.
This will be the last question.
Sure.
Hi, Premier Rudy from IFM News.
Hi, Rudy.
I was just wondering, how does the province have a plan to continue to support the forestry sector so that companies like Herbshaw can continue for another 175 years and 6 generations?
Oh, great question, and I'm going to hand it over to my expert, the minister, and Graydon Smith will answer that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the question, and absolutely, and you know, I'm struck by that quote that Kirsten mentioned today about looking back. You know, helps us look forward, and certainly in Ontario we are looking forward. We have a forest sector strategy that underlines the importance of the forestry sector here in Ontario. I know there's a number of folks from the industry here today to help celebrate. We meet with them frequently. We talk frequently about how we can make sure that this historical industry in Ontario is one that is very much about the future as well. We've got great components as part of that strategy, like the Forest Biomass Action Plan, to allow us to use more forest products and residuals to make sure that, again, this industry remains of clean and green Ontario. So I'm very excited about forestry industry, not only today, but in the future of this province, and it'll be a big part of it for years to come.
Thank you. Just to follow up, Premier, what are your thoughts on the facility here and getting to use some of the equipment earlier today?
It's pretty amazing. People don't realize, that live in the cities. If it wasn't for companies like Herbshaw and Sons, we wouldn't be able to do the connectivity. We wouldn't be able to get electricity from point A to point B. But this is what true entrepreneurism does. It creates jobs. It supports our economy right across the province, keeps people connected. And I come from a family business too, and I just again want to thank the Shaw family for 175 years of being in this community. They're a staple here, and we're so grateful. Companies like that will always support Ontario-made products, and I'm just so proud of the entire family, and thank you. Thank you for everything that you do for all 15 million people in Ontario. We're very, very grateful, and God bless the Shaw family. They're absolute champions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin to conclude the event, and before the Shaw
We're going to focus again back on healthcare, and Jagmeet Singh does have a point that distribution of healthcare should be completely equal. While I would say that Jagmeet Singh his statements are not going far enough, that they are too focused at this particular time on our children, and which our children are extremely valuable and an asset to our society because they are our future. That we do need to put a larger focus on who is here and now, and that we need to rediscover the compassion of just getting people care and forgetting about the cost, because the cost of not providing health care to others means that valuable people have passed on without due cause. So we do want to send our gratitude and congratulations to the companies in the forestry industry in Ontario for surviving and thriving since 1847, and to the Algonquin people who have worked closely with them to make these sort of things happen for our society. I'm sure that the companies who do act responsibly and provide the right kinds of wealth and security to the territories that they actually operate in, that the existence since 1847 is well deserved. Thank you for listening to us here on Depictions Media, and we want to thank you for sharing in our mission to spread equality and to spread what we need as assets to be real human beings, and what it means that we all have an existence as human beings in this particular world, and that we should all be protected under that, and we should all find equality. So thank you for clicking on that subscribe button that was nearby you and getting continued updates from Depictions Media as things happen in our world that we need to celebrate, sometimes protest, and sometimes point out to others as we move forward. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.